So today I'm going to be talking about improving accessibility at Heriot-Watt, learning the lessons that we've had from the University of East Anglia. So we're going to have me talking for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to have 30 minutes of Q&A where seriously it's any sort of question of any type. You will not offend me. We'll try and get a very practical solution for you. Then there's going to be a coffee, and then we're going to have another couple of hours where me and Dan, my colleague and husband, will be talking about how we actually implement design so that it's accessible design. So I'm Dr. Katherine Deane. I'm an Associate Professor in Healthcare Research at the University of East Anglia in Norwich on the east coast of England, down south, very down south. 7 hours to get it. It's a great story. And I do research on the management of long-term conditions and disabilities. So I do what I call the boring day-to-day, taking your pills right, sticking to the exercise program, sticking to the diet, etc. But I'm also, and have been for about the last 10 years, the Access Ambassador to the University of East Anglia. It's a title I took on for myself and no one was there to take off, basically. And I basically set myself up as a disability advocate for the university, and also because, as my Vice Chancellor very rightly said, we don't just sell the university, we sell the area. So we've really tried to share our expertise and interest and advocacy for disability access with the surrounding museums, and we've talked about what impact we've had. So yes, the sort of impact we've had on our own campus, it is now one of the most central campuses in the country. No, there are no standards I can quote that against. It's one of the areas I want to change. What we need to do, we need to be able to set gold, silver, or bronze standard of accessibility at universities. But we can't at the moment. But I do know that when I tend to roll around at other campuses, I tend to hit a larger snags than I find. That isn't to say mine is perfect, but we have done a lot of work. One of the things we're particularly proud of is the new science building that we have there. It's a 4-story building. The first floor, ground floor, is teaching, and then we have 3 floors of laboratories for chemistry, physics, electronics, and computing. So, and biology. So it is every type of lab that you can think of, and there are a few smaller research labs in type of program. That building is highly accessible. There are no absolute barriers to access. There's a few niggles, a few things we'd like to improve, but they really are in the minor niggle zone. And this picture down here in the left-hand, in the right-hand corner, as you're looking at, as I'm looking, as we're looking at it on the screen, is of the labs. And we'll talk about the accessibility features of those in a little bit. But also we've got a changing place access for toilets. It's 2.5 miles to your nearest one here, and that's a toilet with a bench and a hoist. So I think you can say that that's something I would highly recommend that you get. It is regular use, and it makes a massive difference for our students who have this level of need, who previously effectively had to return to their accommodation to get changed. And that made, effectively lunchtime, that was all they did. And so definitely not an equivalent student experience. So we're very proud to have that. It's in the new science building, which is around the corner from the Sainsbury's Art Gallery, Art Centre, which is lovely. So they have it on their facilities as just 5 minutes away is a toilet that anybody can use. Excuse me. But considering the option for people who need to have their right. But considering the option that people who need to have their pads changed is not uncommonly that they're being changed on the floor of a disabled toilet with the door open because there's insufficient space for their carers to work around them. These facilities are really very much needed, and less than 10%. We think only about 10% of universities actually even have one. Very few universities have more than one. Manchester does. But it's very important to improve the visibility of the disability access. So we have these orange lines going around our entire campus, which highlight which are the step-free routes. We are a multi-level, multi-staired campus, and so that's very successful. But apart from anything else, it really demonstrates that we're willing to vandalise our campus and make it visible that you are welcome here, you are important enough for us to make this a very big change on our campus. But we have shared our accessibility, so I got the joy of opening Winchester Planetarium because they had us advise them on the accessibility of their planetarium and science centre, very lovely, down in South Coast, and they have a changing place accessible toilet that's open with a radar feed 24/7, and they have a door tracker. And they say, yes, we do get people in at 2 a.m. in the morning because they're near to one of the main A routes down to the southwest of the country. So it really does become a community resource. So wherever you do put your changing place, put it in a foyer, put it in a building that's open for as long as possible, so that anybody in the community can drive in and use it at times. We've also advised the Norwich Castle, which we're very pleased to say it's got lottery funding for improving its accessibility in particular, and we're going to be able to get all the way up to the roof once all the roof works are finished, which is really unusual. I mean, we're very lucky that that castle has basically no innards whatsoever. It's just a roof. There's the innards were so much about over many years. They didn't get protected status, so we've been very able to do that. But we've also made very practical things like a roadworks ramp. So we've advised on making a roadworks ramp. You know those horrid yellow things that balance on the curb and everyone goes over with tentative steps as the pavement's been blocked by works? Well, we've got one that sits on the road. It doesn't balance, it just butts up to the curb. And because it's got soft edges and stuff, you can roll over it, you don't have to be accurate. And we did that, co-developed that with a real panel of people with every type of disability. So every kind of mobility aid has been across that, guide dogs have been across that, any type of visual impairment has been across that, and agreed that this is about right. So that's the sort of thing that having a disability advocate can do, and by sharing our expertise and our knowing how to really consult well, can have an impact. And this is my mission, but it's also the mission of my research team, is to remove the barriers to accessing life so people can express their brilliance. Because we really do think that by removing this stuff, we enhance the communities that we're working within, we enhance the quality of the research that we're doing, and it really improves everything that we're doing. We really do think that it's incredibly important that we think about the values that we hold, that we're highly respectful of all of the diversity, because of course, disability is the ultimate intersectional diversity. Anybody can become disabled at some point in their life. So you have to be respectful of other aspects of bias in society today. And we have to be as fair and as honest about it as you can. And honesty and disability access actually can feel quite vulnerable maybe, because you're having to admit, no, you can't get into that bit of the building. No, that we don't have lifts in that section. Yes, there isn't a hearing loop here, etc. But honestly, it is far better to be honest about that and let people know that than us to roll up and go, oh, I can't get in. That's worse. We're very much informed by the social model of disability. This takes the approach that I am not disabled because I'm using a wheelchair. This is actually a tool for freedom. I'm disabled because you've only got steps into a building. So the building disables me, and the attitude of building it that way disables me, not that I'm a wheelchair user. And therefore it places responsibility on us to change the environment, to change the attitudes, to change the protocols that we're using on a day-to-day basis to make sure that everybody is involved. And bear in mind, this is not a small percentage of the population. It is at least 20% of the UK population. And I'm very glad to say one of the markers that we track is the number of disabled students that come into our undergraduate courses. And when I started at UEA about 13 years ago, we had about 14% of our undergraduates declaring a disability. This year it's 30%. Now, there's been an increased willingness to declare mental health and specific learning disabilities, but that's a good thing. But actually we are having an increase, as far as we can track with the really poor UCAS codes, physical disabilities as well. And we're definitely having an increase in deaf students, because we're having to provide more and more vibratory alarms in our residential accommodation and things like this, which is great. So we're very happy about that. So anything changes that we do, any training that's run should absolutely be focusing on everybody's responsibility to take action, that it should be informed by disabled people, but it should not be our responsibility to enact. So in other words, it shouldn't be me up in the chair doing this stuff, but it is for the moment. And I'm kind of going, I'm hoping into the future that I get more allies and more advocates that are willing to step up and talk about this stuff. And one of the things that I get is, it's everywhere accessible nowadays. Surely that's legally required. Has been since 1995. Yes, I have been waiting 28 years. Yes, I am impatient. You know, what's the big deal if you can't get into a few buildings and stuff? Well, the big deal is one of my colleagues has a progressive disorder and he is now in a wheelchair but cannot easily get out of it. So he can't easily move into an evac chair. And that means that suddenly a campus that is relatively accessible, like I say, we're crowded it, but there's whole buildings he can't go into anything other than the ground floor because we do not have fire safe lifts. So we've got fire safe lifts in some key buildings and we took great expense to put them into our 8-story high library building and retrofit them in there, but it is huge expensive, massively disruptive, but it's an 8-story building that's open 24/7, so we thought that was worth it. But yeah, we don't have fire safe lifts in a lot of our older buildings, and that means that he is restricted to those that can be accessed from levels at stages. So whether that's a walkway or the ground floor, and suddenly he was going, I can't access loads of the buildings and stuff. We're having to rearrange all of my trade, my teaching and everything. And it really was incredibly disruptive for him. So it's kind of, even in good environments, it really can be really quite challenging to work this through. And it is a case of we're always going to have to be pushing that envelope of how accessible we make everywhere. So I'll hand over to my husband and lab technician, Dan Burrill. Yes.
Okay. So, as part of some work we did beginning of last year, we did a survey of lab accessibility, recruiting scientists and anyone else with an interest in lab access. We got 152 respondents, about half disabled. The vast majority with experience of lab working, only a few that didn't, were in areas like estates or equipment manufacturers. Yeah, other people with an interest but not actually working in the lab. Mostly dominated by biology, biomedical sciences, and mostly either in universities or healthcare settings, which is practically the NHS, given that we were mostly UK-based. And invisible impairments were the most common disabilities that we found. This was one quote that we just thought was important enough that it was worth a slide at a time. Read it myself, but yeah. My lab broke me. I hope others are better. And the results, well, structural access to buildings and labs is poor. We can't get into it. People with disabilities can't get into them. Behaviour, attitudes and knowledge is poor. The initiatives that are being done are tokenistic and ineffective. A lot of stuff is being done, but by small groups or individuals in an uncoordinated way and not being shared. So lots of people are reinventing the wheel a lot in a lot of different ways. Some of them better than others. Web pages and conferences are often inaccessible, and really certain web pages, electronic information should be amongst the most accessible. It's the easiest to do in an accessible fashion without additional cost. But poor access leads to poor safety, leads to unlawful practices. People, organisations breaking the law on a daily basis and getting away with it. Poor recruitment. People with disabilities think, I can't work for you. Or they try anyway, they get the job, and after a while they go, I can't stay in this job, it's hurting me. Extreme cases, you could say, it's killing me. So you get poor retention after you put all the effort into recruiting great people to do a job. So we produced a suite of access guidelines as a way of promoting current best practice or current good. So we covered things like getting the basics wrong, which happens a lot. Things like ergonomics. Only half of labs roughly had ergonomic adjustable seating. In practice, that's only half of labs had seating full stop. 90% or greater than 90% of benches and equipment weren't height adjustable. This is something that's affected me personally. As you might notice, I'm not a small person. And I have found in my time as a technician that working in fume hoods, isolation cabinets was incredibly damaging to the point of being off sick long term and changing the area in which I work. Only 2/3 of labs have an accessible toilet in the same building. So that's a third of labs where you want to go spend a penny, you've got to go out in the rain and cold and the dark, potentially 10, 15 minutes. Now, if you've got issues with urgency and frequency, as a considerable number of disabled people do, that's not a great combination. So, and then only a quarter of the accessible toilets have good visual access, so you can tell where the door is, where the floor is and the wall starts, where the toilet, the white toilet is against the white floor and the white walls. This is a problem, as Katherine mentioned. Roughly 10% had access to a changing place accessible toilet before. So I think I'll hand back to Katherine here.
So we do have more details on that if people need to see that, and we are hoping to publish that soon. So if we look at how we've actually enacted these changes, because that's what I think we get out of this, but it's so expensive and it's so complex what we do, how we do it. And I've really focused on getting the action stuff. I've really focused on getting the ramps in, the signage change, the lighting change. I've really focused on that side of things. And the research has come later, so probably take work later. I've absolutely accepted personal risk. I probably have scuppered my risk chances of promotion, absolutely, because I've been so outspoken and loud about this. And, but it's equally, a lot of the stuff that I've recommended has been intuitive in how I've done it, but equally, I have done behaviour change research. I do know my models. So in retrospect, you can go, yes, it is the combi model of behaviour change, which is about having the capability to change, the opportunities to put that in place, and the motivation to do so. And we've basically tried to shift the system into a new configuration so that access is always something that is being considered on a regular basis, and minimising the risk of reversion, because there is pushback. There is, why do we need to bother? Haven't we solved this? Isn't that yesterday's agenda? We can move on now. And actually, accessibility is really the forgotten diversity a lot of the time. We've done women, we've done black, we've done gay. That's it, isn't it? Disability, it's actually quite stunning when you look at EDI policies, how little disability access is mentioned on those. So it's really important that we highlight this and continue to say there's a long way to go. We do need to look at capabilities, so structural and attitudinal barriers, the knowledge and skills, the training, allyship and bystander training. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail. Opportunities, new builds and refurbishments. You're going to repaint walls. So that's the time when you think, should we have a contrasting colour to the floor and against the porcelain, so that we can stop having white box toilets that I go in and go, yeah, there's everything. All new equipment purchasing, and bear in mind that EPSRC have been consulting with me and others about starting to say, they put out a grant round about twice a year saying, would you like a new big piece of equipment? They're now going to have a section in that application form that says, and how are you going to make this equipment accessible? Where is it going to be in the building? What are your policies around providing assistance to use that piece of equipment? And it is expected that this sort of requirement is going to start to spread out into all of grant policies, that we are going to start having a section on how are you going to make your research accessible. So that's brilliant. Every hire, every recruit, there's always that putting out that you want disabled candidates for to consider for your positions. All your processes and procedures. Sick leave is usually the classic one. It usually tries to say, oh, we've been off for too long, let's get rid of you, rather than how should we as an employer try to make sure that the workplace actually works for you now that you have an additional need. The motivation, the number one thing is, well, it could be you. Can you, oh, my brain has lost her name, but there's a lovely comedian, this cerebral palsy, who says there's only two types of people in the world: those that are disabled, those that are going to be. So think about it, you were all in likelihood to become disabled towards the end of your life. This is enlightened self-interest. And also, far more people are disabled than the stats really recognise. I usually go into a room and people go, oh, you're the disabled person. I go, yeah, let's have a further discussion. And then you discover that somebody's got a very dodgy heart, somebody's got diabetes, somebody else has got epilepsy. And you go, yeah, so we're all disabled. I go, oh, I haven't labelled myself that way. Perfectly understandable. It's quite a stigmatising label, but in terms of trying to understand the needs out there at the moment, there's a lot of hidden disability that we don't know how to accommodate well. But it really is that diversity has frequently and repeatedly been shown to improve quality and improve profitability. So it is very enlightened self-interest. We will talk more about this in the workshop next, but London University have done some lovely work on what they call core values work, where they identify the suppression techniques, the things that maintain bias in a given culture. And then they talk about the counter strategies and affirmation techniques. So the things you should do as a system, as an institution, as an organization, and the things you should be doing as an individual. And that's actually a really nice framework for thinking about how do we push back against what is a societally created bias. And it is bigger than the university, obviously, but it is something that actually, as a university, can make a massive amount of difference. And like I say, we really do need to make sure that you have the broadest possible definition of disability. You do include the mental health, you do include neurodiversity, you do include deaf, you do include all of the ranges of physical disability, visible and invisible. It is an inherently intersectional issue, and you've got to all rise up together. So you cannot leave behind your Black colleagues, you cannot leave behind your people identifying as female colleagues, etc., etc. But you've got to be aware of all of this when you're doing these sorts of changes, because it can have unintended consequences for other biases that we hold. Oh, sorry. Like I say, I'm impatient. I've been waiting since 1995, and it's very important to highlight 1995 because everybody talks about the Equality Act of 2010. And I'm going, nah, that's too late. And then people go, what? I go, right, the Discrimination Act was rolled into the Equality Act, barely any change. So I've been waiting since 1995 for these legal requirements to be enacted. I love holding people accountable to their mission statements. UKRI has a great research by everybody for everybody. And I go, yes, yes, am I everybody? And they go, not yet. And I go, yes, I know that. Can we change that? You know, Manchester has lovely things like, you know, to advance education, knowledge and wisdom for the good of society. I'm sure Heriot-Watt has very similar sort of, you know, we're for the good of the whole community. It's kind of, yeah, whole community. That would be the bit that I focus on, and is, am I in that community? Am I really represented? Am I really welcome? Am I really able to engage with you as an institution? But I really would emphasize being brave, that perfect is the enemy of done, and that you just get in there and do what you can, as good as you can, and put your feedback with where the corners would still need to be knocked off. But there is so much that we do know already that would be beneficial. This is what I call dichotomous benefit. In other words, we do not need a randomized controlled trial to prove that a ramp helps me get into a building. It is either there is a ramp, I can get in, or there is steps and I can't. Simple dichotomous outcomes. Yes, no, it is or it's not accessible. There is a huge amount in accessibility that is that sort, but without this, access does not happen. And then, like I say, it is thinking about it from an access all areas, access everybody attitude, that you think about it in terms of physical impairments, sensory impairments, and cognitive impairments tend to be the big three boxes that you need to think about it. Test it with real users, consult real users. Your student body and your staff with disabilities are an absolutely essential resource to checking that this works in the context of the work that Heriot-Watt does. It is always cheaper done up front. Retrofitting costs a fortune. So to give you an example, the powered doors that I put into the new science building cost between £1,000 and £2,000 a door to put in. You immediately go, yes, it is, but it was installed and everything, so that's fine. It costs up to 15 grand to retrofit them per door in one of my older buildings. And it's kind of, oh, that's a lot more money. And that really is the sort of level of differential between put it in the first place and retrofit it. The cost, you usually add a zero, which basically is what the usual definition is. It's retrofitted and add a zero. It is tenfold cost, so it's so important. Small increments are more achievable and sustainable, and definitely take advantage of serendipity, but never fear going big. If you've got an opportunity to go big, you go big. And by simple things, and I will provide you with one of these, we have these red cord cards. They're from Ewan's Guide, which is effectively TripAdvisor for people with disabilities. And they have these red cord cards, which they can provide at the extortionate cost of 60 quid per 100. I mean, you know, it's pence. And you put them on red cords in all of your accessible toilets and anywhere else you have a red cord. They are brilliant. They immediately stopped the vast majority of our cords being tied up. Immediately, we have a safety feature that finally is available to us. Now, if you're really being exciting, you then want to do an audit of which ones work and whether anyone comes when you do pull the cord. Because that's the challenging bit, but at least you've got as far as the safety equipment is available to you. Accessible teams, we have our Access All Areas team started on looking at structural stuff and actually effectively proved our work, proved our knowledge, proved our credibility in that zone and improved our visibility. And that was great. And then we started to look at procedures and protocols, etc. So teaching was an area, and we've got a most wonderful inclusive teaching team. And we have now given lots of advice to the university on making sure that our web pages maximize accessibility. We did have to argue with our consultants. They thought that 80% accessibility will be ahead of the field. It's fine. And we went, no. They went, what? We went, no. There's no reason for us not to go for 100%. Oh, but it doesn't look as punchy and as pretty. Don't care. Not relevant. Not in part of our argument. They went away with a flea in their ear because we sort of went, no, not having it. We're going for 100%. There's no reason for us not to go for 100%. Loads of guidance out there. W3C guidance is very clear and understandable. We now have a rule whereby our slides have to be provided at least a week in advance. And no, we haven't audited that, but this is at least the principle that we're trying to get everything out in advance. I've been to other universities to teach and maybe at the max a term in advance, but everything's out at the start of term. Now, it's just about when you plan, when you're doing it. It actually doesn't take too much additional work. It's a little bit front loading, but it does happen. Ask about accommodations rather than diagnoses. So I have a friend who's got cerebral palsy. He goes, yeah, I'm a wheelchair user. Yes, I've got left-sided weakness and all the rest of it. That's actually not the problem. The problem is I've got really severe dyslexia. And actually, as a university, as an institution, you need to know how many wheelies do we have, how much ramp access do we need, etc. What do we need for anybody that's hearing impaired? What do we need for the vision impaired? It's the impairments rather than the diagnosis that's the relevant bit. So it's what do we need to be supporting? Very much please don't gaslight our students and staff with disabilities. We've had that quite enough by society. Oh, you're too young, you're too pretty, you don't look disabled in one way or another. But put the proofs in an appropriate level. Don't require letters from consultants and things like that. Getting those out of the NHS at the moment is an absolute art form, and yes, will delay things substantially. And building access. have it accessible right from the get-go. So we have a policy whereby all of our first years for their first semester go into fully accessible routes. That allows for late declaration. It allows for people not realising they need to declare and all the rest of it. But it means that we can continue to teach them. So the first years get priority on the accessible routes. And all of our student accommodation that's labelled as accessible gets built with voices built in. Because again, the retrofitting of voices is so expensive. Accessible research, again, passion of mine. We should expect disabled participants, no matter what research you're doing, you should expect our disabled participants. And I say this coming from a faculty of health. Yeah, even health research should expect disabled participants. Yeah, it sounds as stupid as it is, but honestly, there's so much health research going on that expects you to have a single diagnosis and otherwise be fit and healthy and be able to cope with anything. And it's kind of, there's so much research out there that excludes me because I cannot roll into it. I can't get into the facilities, or it takes too much time, or too much cost, or, you know, expects me to travel, or traveling with this beastie is quite a job. So you need to do good quality patient engagement, PPI. You need to audit and track the EDI characteristics, both of your researchers and of the participants. You need to make sure that obviously your information is clear and simple, but also has a section that explicitly says how we have made this project accessible. In other words, rather than just the default, tell us if you've got any needs, which is lazy and actually quite a barrier. Because God, I've got to tell you everything again. Why do I have to tell you? No, it's up to the researchers. It's their responsibility to say, we are holding these interviews in a step-free venue. There's an accessible toilet around the corner. And if you need it, we can provide a BSL interpreter. That's far more welcoming. That's genuine work on the part of the researchers saying, yes, we really mean it when we say we want you to participate. We want ethics to start to require that. We recognise there is a budgetary impact, and we are pressing funders about that. Really, there is a degree of evidence-based dissent that goes on here, that you do have to be a bit of a troublemaker to get this change done. It isn't something that you can ask for nicely and expect it to happen. You do have to be disruptive. Stories plus numbers is very clear, critical but creative and supportive. It is a long journey that's got to be gone on, and it isn't an individual's fault this is the case. Our estates team have gone on this journey, and when I started working with them, they challenged me quite rightly on whether or not putting powered doors was green. UEA has a lot of eco research going on and a lot of credibility in that. So they've learned that everything that we put in has to be green. So they say, well, is putting in all these powered doors green? Don't they use energy? So that's bad. And I went, okay, let me go away and look it up. Found out that basically it's turn the light switch on and off is what the power door uses to open. So it's not, okay, that's not a problem. But their journey that they've gone on is that this year we have an American student come to visit us in the autumn who's quadriplegic, has no movement in his limbs. We've gone around and mostly, for the most part, used push pads to have our powered doors open. Obviously, he's not going to be able to use those. So he emailed us, thankfully, well in advance, and sort of said, so how am I going to get around the campus? And I thought, oh, darn, that's going to be a challenge. Okay, they're probably going to have somebody allocated to them to push the pads. My estate teams, far better. They said, oh, no, we can solve this. We know you can have an app on the phone, it'll send a signal, we just have to put little receivers above all of the push pads, link it into the electronics, and as he rolls up, the doors will just magically open in front of him. And they're going, oh, this is wonderful, they are brilliant, and it's just so brilliant. And even better, they're going back to that student and checking that that would actually work. So, you know, that's the journey they've been on, of being initially cautious, worried, not sure it fitted with the other values of the university, to now being incredibly creative and incredibly solution focused. We do need training around this stuff, and we are starting to look at this. We've just got a grant from the Wellcome Trust looking at research culture, and it will include things like anti-ableist training and allyship and bystander training. In other words, what do you do? What do you say when you step up and see something going on? And we do need to have targets, and I think that's really helpful in the context of the university. We're used to working to targets. So need to be starting to do things like audit your personal emergency evacuation plans. One of the more shocking pieces of data that we found in that survey was that only 20% of our people that found they needed a PEEP had one. So 38 people needed one. And these are very visible disabilities. That's significant mobility impairment, hearing impairment, or visual impairment. These are not hidden disabilities. These will impair your chances of getting out of the building in an appropriate time. And only 8 of the 38 people had a PEEP. Lots of reasons for that, but really shocking that that's that low. We do need to think about assessing this on a regular basis and normalising this. So the TUC has a wonderful reasonable accommodations passport that is very useful, and I would recommend that we start to envelop that into annual appraisal processes, and that everybody is asked on an annual basis, what can this institution do to help you work well? Because your personal circumstances will change. I've now got a child, I've got caring responsibilities. My mum is dementing and I've got need to visit her more often. You know, it's not just the disability stuff. And of course, disabilities vary and people acquire them, etc. And it opens up that conversation and makes it explicit that this is normal, this is human, this is what we should be looking at. So I have got guidelines on buildings and stuff. Please implement as much as you can, particularly into new builds, but also into any refurbishment. It really does make a difference, and it really is makes it. Make sure that you've got evac chairs and all the stairs that you should have them in, or relevant alternatives. Use microphones and make that normalised, and make sure that that's done regularly. That we put USB record cards, and that we have colour contrast in toilets and other places, so that you can clearly see where the walls are, that we don't end up with white box labs and toilets and things like this, as we often do. 5 years' time, I'll give you the heads up. I'm hassling the funders, and I'm not alone. There are going to start to be minimum standards required before you are eligible for grants. So there will be radical things like a toilet in the lab, in the building your lab is in. Yes, there will be requirements for that, things like this, and an accessible toilet within the building. Things like dual alert fire alarms systems, making sure that the equipment connects to each other. And so effectively, you can have a piece of kit in the lab, standard, but its control panel can be outputted to voice technology, eye gaze technology, controls, etc. So it is far more usable by somebody with a disability. Definitely get the basics of the ergonomics, the seating, the lighting, the acoustics, and making sure that routes are have lightweight doors on them and step-free and things like this. And then 10 years, the standards will keep rising, and that I can guarantee you is that the standards of accessibility have risen. Building standards are often quoted in this field. They are incredibly basic and incredibly, small. Changes required. No, we're not asking for building standards, and nor is anybody else anymore. We've got far more higher aspirations. We're trying to have equitable access to buildings and facilities. There's a link to the guidelines. There's my email and Dan's emails. Very happy to have conversations with anybody about this stuff. I love looking at blueprints and very happy to advise. Any questions? Thank you very much. I'm silent with learning anymore. It's far too early for one, isn't it? Yeah, there's no apology. But we're borrowing Catcalf's money to get us up here for a workshop that we did yesterday. So you get me.
It's interesting you mentioned about the benches.
Yes.
And I work in the chemistry laboratories a lot of the time. And to get that, we had a wheelchair user several years ago who had limited use. I think he could use a keypad.
Yes.
Moving on his wheelchair.
Yes.
Sorry. But he needed somebody with him the whole time to actually carry out the manipulations.
Yeah.
And I mean, the door access into the lab, so we had to open the door.
Yes.
But I mean, it's just kind of like things like how you would like for the fume cupboard. So you mentioned about the fume cupboard issue. how you could get them like life change.
Oh,
that
We're
kind
very
of-
glad to say that we've been working with one of our local companies, Tion, who does fume hoods and cat-two hoods and things like that. And they've actually now manufactured, as part of our collaboration with them, a height adjustable stand that fume hoods and cat-two hoods, etc., can be put and go up and down. And then obviously not the only company, but they're the ones we work with.
Because New Science has accessible fume hoods.
Yes,
They were actually, that was a different company.
that was a different
and
company.
They
You can get
ended
them
up repurposing adjustable height benches
Right.
to effectively form like the bottom of the fume hood, and obviously then validated that that would still provide appropriate extraction.
I mean,
But
obviously you
we
need a
have
bit of-
those in all of our labs and prep rooms.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, and obviously you need a bit of flexibility on the air connections and everything
Yeah.
else, but it is entirely achievable. And what we found on the survey was for fume hoods and things, it was under 5% of labs had any height adjustability. And it really is not just for disability access. This really is for, if you've got somebody of 5 foot nothing and somebody of 6'6",
Yeah.
they cannot use the same fume hood height. You know, that really becomes problematic. Dan used to kneel.
Yeah, literally, as when I was a school science technician, rather than university, I used to dilute concentrated acids on my knees because that was how I could get access to doing it in the fume hood, which wasn't ideal. Obviously, I'd risk assessed it. But that's when it's like, I don't just need a lab coat. I'm going to put the big PVC apron on, and also I'd assessed my ability to evacuate the position immediately in front of the hood. Practically, I tried rolling away before I put anything dangerous in the hood, and I was confident I could still do that. But it's not ideal. It's not comfortable. But it got the job done.
And I think what the problem has been is that we've often built institutions, developed processes and protocols, assuming there is such a thing as a normal human being, as an average person. And actually, we're biological beings, we are inherently variable. There is a large range of normal variability before you even hit disability. And actually, often it's incredibly poor. Labs is, I think, one of the last bastions of really poor access. We knew when we were doing this survey that we would identify very poor access. We were actually shocked at how bad it was. But, you know, it is that thing of, why on earth do you need somebody to open the door for you? We have the technology, we can solve that. And actually, it means that the lab techs in New Science Building love me because they go, we can get around with our trolleys, we can have things in both hands, you know, there's a lot of reasons why that actually adds to the workability of the entire building for everybody in that. And that's what you find, is there's a lot of washover benefit of accessibility, that it actually makes it much more livable for everybody.
I wonder how many labs in Heriot-Watt University lab research groups actually have general risk assessments for disabled persons. I would probably ascertain very few.
I would absolutely agree. And, you know, it really is that basic thing of, could I get in? If I could get in, could I turn around? And only a third of labs have a sufficient turning circle for a wheelchair. Lab benches are often far too close together. That's one of the things that you could see, well, a picture of the new science lab. We have at least 2 meters gap between our benches because we expect the seats to be pulled out and you still be able to get down past the middle of them. Now, the real advantage of that is, particularly as these are teaching labs that can have large numbers of students in them. Our chemistry lab on the top floor has only up to 150 students at a time. But it means that the lecturers say, it's great, because you hear whoops over there, and you can usually see it, and you can always get to it. You're not having to just, can you move in a bit? Can I just squeeze past? But you're not knocking people as you're going past, you just go. And that makes a massive difference to safety. And yes, as you say, there is just this assumption that we're not there. And unfortunately, that's a self-fulfilling assumption. You know, you don't go.
I mean, I understand you've got.
Don't go there, so you don't need the access.
I understand you've got the peak for each individual,
Oh, yes.
but this, to me, there should be a general
Yes, no, I agree.
risk
There
assessment
should
for
be a generic
disability.
sort of information so that you can think about is.
And the next question I'm going to ask, in the current financial climate, you're saying 10 years.
Oh, yeah, but you see, oh, yeah, but.
And
The
that's what the
cost-
university would come out with.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
other universities would be the same in this
Oh, yeah,
current
no,
financial
we just
climate.
been through a financial crisis, and as a union rep, I've been fighting to save many of my members' jobs, so I'm very aware of the financial restrictions. However, I would actually say that vast numbers of these cost zero or near to zero. You know, you're going to be refurbishing places anyway. Do it to this standard, I promise it does not cost extra. That new science building was built 1.25 million under budget. And it is highly accessible, because the planning was put in place at the start. As you know, like I say, a pot of paint which is a different colour to white does not cost much money, you know, that sort of thing. It really is. These are small incremental improvements a lot of the time. Yes, there are some big ticket items, but they're not likely to be asked for immediately. But it really is important to start to highlight to the management of the institution that these requirements are going to start to come in. The funders of the research and of education are going to start to say, well, why don't you have this? And they are going to start to explicitly ask for it. There are going to be auditable checklists and things like this coming in. Very, very clearly, you can see that, but we're about to start developing some ourselves, but we're going to try and gain consensus with learned societies as well as the funders and stuff, so that we are asking for sensible things, so that we don't require you to put in a brand new lift or anything like this, because that is a big pocket money stuff. I mean, we put in a brand new lift into the student union because the top floor wasn't suitably accessible. And yes, that did cost us £250,000 because it was very interesting in architecture. A floor under tension. And so punch a hole in it, the entire thing is more than that. So yes, 1970s building techniques that were not helpful, but I'm sure you're all very aware of that on this campus. But seriously, if it's put into the budget, if it's done on an incremental basis, if every time an area is refurbished or upgraded or repurposed, access is automatically built in, it really does start to shift. And it, you know, we have a budget of about £300,000 a year, which really is not that large. And that's just for the extra stuff. So we do expect the individual schools to put in place an ergonomic chair or adjustable height bed, table, a desk and things for their individual staff. So the small stuff we expect the schools to do, the bigger stuff is there for us, but also then there's all the standard refurbishment. And no, our budget doesn't go on the standard refurbishment, but we expect that to be done to the higher standard. And once you start putting that expectation in place, once it's part of the SOPs, it is a lot cheaper and it's a lot easier. You know where you find the different coloured fascias for your power sockets, you know, and you just put them in. It's just as they're damaged, as they need replacing, as they need upgrading, you just put them in. And suddenly you've got an entire area whereby instead of white on white on white, you've got grey fascias. And suddenly I can find where the socket is and be able to switch the last thing on, rather than literally running my hands along the wall there to find it. The same for light switches and stuff. In fact, in new sites we had both the fascias coloured, but where we couldn't, we just put a painted line around them. Again, whilst you're in there painting, we'll just put a different colour contrast around the light switch. And then as a VIP, I can hand brass. So much of this is small, so much of this is genuinely low cost. It really is, there's a lot of incremental stuff that actually can be done with very, very low budget. Do not be put off by that feels like a lot. Yes, it is a lot. There's a lot of areas to be thinking about, but once you start putting it into place as part of your standard practice, I promise it does not cost that much.
I mean, we had a scenario recently where there was new doors fitted to a building, external doors.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, for day one, I said the doors weren't suitable. And actually, one of the doors is beauty alignment and everything. So I basically got estates, I got health and safety down, and we ascertained that the doors weren't even wide enough, single leaf, to let a wheelchair in.
Yeah.
But my question was, you've renewed these doors, why didn't you put an automatic door for disability access?
Mm-hmm.
oh, it wasn't feasible. And I'm like, but you have 3 parking disabled bays right next to that door.
Exactly.
I say, but disabled people can't get in the doors.
Yeah.
Now they're having, these doors were all fitted 18 months ago. They're now having to rip them out to put an automatic door in.
That's it, that's it, that's the cost, that's the real cost, it's not doing it. You will get the demand, and like I say, our numbers of disabled students declaring has gone up. That's not necessarily the numbers of disabled students absolute, yet there was probably a lot that didn't declare, but actually we do know there is an increased number of students, of proportional of students with a body that is disabled. They're coming. Let's have the facilities that allow them to study here. Schools have got better at getting them the A-level grades to be eligible for the study at university. If you've got an academic brain, we should have you at university. It opens so many doors to students. We shouldn't be restricting that opportunity. And it opens so many doors to arts that we desperately need a more diverse workforce into the future. We need more diverse research that is relevant. You know, it is so critical. We've got heaps of evidence of if research is just done by white middle class people who are able-bodied, the quality sucks, the relevancy sucks. Sorry, but we've got to stop doing that, and that is recognised by all the funding houses now. And we've got a shift, and that shift is coming very rapidly. And disability access is one where it's actually quite easy to point to things and go, see, we've installed 200 power doors extra in my campus. I've doubled the number of power doors in my campus. Yes, my estates guys both love and loathe me. It's an equal measure because maintenance of power doors that are made by various manufacturers that are up to 30 years old is challenging at times. However, they've got now incredible expertise at maintaining these glass things. So we had this sticky period where they were always going out. And then you guys developed the skills and knew where the suppliers were and all that sort of stuff. And then it becomes, yeah, they usually work. And they make a massive difference. They really do. It really was. When we started the Access All Areas scheme, doors was the number one thing we said, we're just going to put in loads more. Because at the time, it was to building standards, the outside door was powered. And that was it. We're going, yeah, that means we can't get around the building. And to the extent that I was frequently going into a building, doing something, and then coming out of the building, going down the corridor and down the walkway, and then back in the building because I couldn't get through the corridor. You know, it was that hard to get through and stuff. So it's really important to shift these basics. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I think you were beginning to touch on the question that I was interested in when you talked about students' numbers declaring.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether, as I don't know how many people are aware that the rates of disclosure, declaration of disability in universities is extraordinarily poor. It's usually around about 3 or 4% when the figure should be up to around about a fifth or something like that.
Yes,
And it tends to come out at things like ref cycles and
absolutely.
Grievances and
Yes.
disciplinaries and
if you do
capabilities.
an anonymous survey of staff, you usually have at least 10% differential between what HR knows about and what's in the survey.
Yeah.
So there's a 10% non-disclosure at the very minimum in any university. And yeah, that's because you go, well, would you disclose? And you think about it for yourselves and you kind of go, well, would I tell them? And it's kind of, well, sorry, at the moment, there's still so much bias and stuff. And that's where we need the training and we need the attitude shift and we need the normalization. That disability is just another characteristic that we need to be accommodating better.
I mean, my question really was, in your work as a practitioner stroke activist, I think the two are inseparable in this particular sense, whether you'd had any kind of success in that area, because in one sense, it's only part of the journey. But if you've got a vice chancellor who says there's 15% people who've, where it was 3 before, it's not a problem. Oh, it's 15% now. I mean, they've only stood up and took notice of students when the numbers began to rise.
Yes.
Still not engaged as constructively could do. But so, have you had any success in that area? So, what's your success?
To UEA, I don't know. I've got to go and hunt down the data out of HR, who are very close mouthed about this sort of data. So I have asked, but I've got to go and ask again. Overall in the sector, the amount of disclosure has effectively doubled in about the last 5 years, but mostly in mental health, so and neurodiversity. brilliant that it is, brilliant that people feel they can disclose this and get appropriate accommodation. But yes, there is a recognition that it must be undeclared. Like I say, we are working on a project, just a 2-year project with Wealthy Trust, but it's well funded, to look at changing the research culture. And part of that will be about normalising and declaring for disability accommodations and stuff. And we'll see if that has any benefit and has any effect, and people feel more confident about doing so, because their PIs will have been required, not asked, required to attend some of this training and about allyship and bystanderage and not about PIs aspects, and really emphasis on the expected behaviours of those staff, so that we're supporting them to be appropriate PIs, etc., that they know how to support. Because a lot of the time, PIs come to me and go, I don't know how to support, I don't know what I would do. It really worries me. I've got an applicant, they say they've got autism, what do I do? And it's kind of, okay, let me give you some stepping stones, let me give you some support, let me give you some information about how wonderful it can be to have. I've had a number of PhD students with autism, and they're quite brilliant. And certainly Max's thesis would give to other people and go, like, all the acoustic analysis he did, yeah, you have the disadvantage of being neurotypical. Shame, you'll probably be able to do a third of the analysis he did. And it's really placing it in that sort of context of saying, yeah, people get anxious, people get depressed, people, have challenges, people, I've got a student I'm supervising at the moment with MS. We, both of us together, can get brain fog, and when we're mutually brain fogged, and then we look at the document another month later and go, oh lordy, we were double brain fogged. It doesn't make sense. Okay, let's rewrite it again. But I mean, all of us have written gobbledygook at times. It's not unique to us that have got neuro disease, it's like gobbledygook. So I think it's having a more humane approach to staff and being honest about it. And one of the advantages of, like I say, we started with the structural stuff that gave us the credibility. It showed people there was genuine investment and a determination to change. It's very clear, there's a ramp that didn't used to be there. There's a lift that didn't used to be there. The signage is loads better, etc., etc. I've got colleagues saying, you've got the lighting changed, I no longer have migraine. It's all that sort of stuff. And it's kind of that, effectively, you've got to develop the trust that it's worth saying to your employer, I've got this, you could stigmatise me, for me, about me, for telling you that, but I will trust that you won't. It's the same as flying Pride flag of having Black History Month and all the rest of it. It's about that public declaration that these are members of our community that we value, and that the actions do follow that, and that there's specific support for those groups, that there's mentorship for the specific groups and things like this to really support and counter that societal bias that we're working within. I hope that makes sense. Like I said, we are improving. When I started, I was the only wheelchair using member of staff in the entire university. I'm now aware of about half a dozen of us. So that's 13 years, and we've gone up 6-fold. So I think it's gradually improving, but it will take time, and there is a lot of complexity to unpick. But yeah, we are working on it, and as and when we get the Welcome Trust resources validated and that sort of stuff, if there is very firm steer from Welcome that should be publicly available and that we can share.
Do you find that people always know what they need, or do you also find it that they're like, I know what the problem is, but I don't know what the solution is?
Absolutely, no. It's one of these things that you must always ask, because somebody might have the most fabulous, bespoke, cool solution that they've got, or they know exactly how they've got to work to be successful, etc. So that's brilliant. But particularly if you're going into a new job and doing new tasks, then you might have no clue how you've got to adapt it to sort that out. Or because you've been masking it, or because you've only recently acquired it, you may again not really quite know. And then it's perfectly valuable to go out to disability-led organisations and relevant charities and say, we've got a VIP, they're newly impaired in their vision. Can you help us with what equipment will be genuinely useful and stuff? And talk to your local NHS occupational therapists as well, because they have loads of information and knowledge, and I regularly pick my OT colleagues' brains about this and stuff. It's being created collaboratively. It's not expecting any one person, whether that is the institution or the staff member or student, to have all of the solutions and all of the knowledge. This is why I asked for this, at this talk, that we had estates here, that we had catering, that we had cleaning, that we had student accommodation here, because actually, those guys are often the key guys that really make things implementable and practical on an everyday basis. So that, you know, it's making sure you have everybody at the table. So when we built New Science, we did have very multidisciplinary consults with the architects and with the contractors to really look at all aspects of how do we teach one, how do we do the science in it, but also how do we clean it, how do we maintain it, how do we keep it running safely. It wasn't just disability access, it was all of everybody in the room, and it allows you to discuss and negotiate the solutions. So I think we'll take a break there, we'll keep teas and coffees and restart at 15:15 for a bit of a workshop to go into a bit more detail and stuff if we can. But thank you very much for coming to the talk this morning. I really appreciate it. I'll get some red cord cards for you guys.
Someone's look at any ability. Or up for a car.
Yeah, those are the cool concepts. You can order them online and everything. Yeah, they really completely stopped it. And it made it, and it made it just so clear to everybody. They really do. They're, you know, I put them on records in train stations and I go back a few months later and they're still